Well, this brings up another question I had as to sort of situational awareness. I mean, today we're so used to everything being delivered instantaneously over the internet, but in 1940 something, uh, the way information flowed, even if you were a top general, was very slow, arguably very inaccurate. There's a sort of a story I read about Manstein's aide actually coming to him on his first day, and Manstein sitting him down and saying, "Hey, look, I need you to tell me actually what the other people are saying because they're not going to tell me. They filter everything because I'm their commanding officer." And so I can't imagine how difficult it was to actually get a really good read on what was going on because, the fact that technology didn't really give you very quick information nor broad information, plus the fact that your information was filtered like by the propaganda ministries and the politicians. So as a general, even, how the hell did you really know what was going on other than your direct reports from your domain? I mean, you wouldn't know what's going on in the Western Front. You wouldn't know how the war production situation is, or the campaign to come up through Italy, or you would receive reports on that, I suppose, but it just they just be so slow. So how did these guys operate? Like, where was their information coming? How did they make decisions?
I I mean, Manstein, he goes into a little bit of detail about how he would go to the front, and he has this great paragraph about how he would smoke cigarettes with tank crews or chat with, machine gun crews. And he made a great effort to go to the front and just to be seen at the front, so that his men who were, going through this enormous ordeal would at least have some sense that their commanding, their top guy was aware of how much they were suffering, if nothing else. But I don't know how beyond the chain of command and like the sort of game of telephone that might become. Yeah, I don't know. I do think that the German army at this time, or really any time, the Germans are not. They're truth tellers. I think that's how Kurt Doolittle would put them. Like they're a very very good at maintaining truth through an organization like that, and like a military. So I don't know that was the problem so much in terms of Manstein knowing, Zone A what's happening, Zone B what's happening. But as you've said, him having any clue about war production or any sense of just how badly the bombings are going, like I don't know. I don't think we could really answer that without some serious research.
Yeah, I can just imagine it was a lot of meetings in person. They're also getting things over
Uh,
encrypted
yeah.
encrypted wires, telegraph, I guess, and then they have to decode it. But that stuff,
Well,
they'd have to bring teams of people to actually sit in those encoding and decoding rooms, I think, and then those things would be typed out, and then they'd be sitting on your desk, and I guess you would sort of have to review them at night. But these things have progressively gotten quicker over history. So just going back into Julius Caesar's tent, in Gaul, I can only imagine, it was that much more slow, and so obviously people make do, and it just fascinates me how
Yeah,
there
information.
are.
the speed, there's kind of different aspects to the whole spectrum of communication. There's the speed of communications, there's the quantity of communications, there's kind of like a latency throughput thing going on. Like, I think even, currently, you might be able to, get a communication to the other side of the planet pretty rapidly. But they were able to do basically the same thing in World War II with, various radio station relays. And most of the time, you don't really have a need to communicate with Japan if you're, sitting in a forest outside Warsaw. Um, filtering out communications and figuring out what you actually need to be paying attention to, particularly when it's in an area that's outside of your hierarchy, is very difficult. So, how would you even know like what question to ask if you're like a colonel on the Eastern Front and you're like, oh, I've got Hitler in front of me. Like, should I take this pistol that I have and like shoot his head off? Well, like, has the family farm been like blown to shit? It's not like there's blogs being like, the war is going terrible. Somebody really needs a Second Amendment solution to this Hitler problem. There's no kind of context for the communication, even if communication is available.
Right, and then there's also the matter of anyone who's worked 70 or more hours a week will know this. Like, when you're completely absorbed in a job and a task, you don't know what's going on in the news. I mean, even with all the internet, like if I have to work a 70-hour week, and I think at this point Manstein's working 100-hour weeks, you don't know. You don't know what's going on. There are limits to your ability to process information and put it into the larger context.
So that's a good point. How did he? Does he discuss it first of all? But how did he then delegate? Did he have sort of a technique? You mentioned like he would go up and smoke cigarettes with his tank crews, which is nice. That sort of humanizes him and makes people feel like he cares, and that boosts morale. But how did he actually sort of break up the job of being a general, whatever that really means, as opposed to being a corporal or something? How did that all work? Did you get a sense for how he broke down the tasks?
He talks about his personal staff a little bit, if nothing else, just to mention that he was the only one among there were 4 guys who worked for him that he got to keep as his personal attendants, his driver and so on, and his assistants throughout the war. But no, he doesn't go into that. I mean, he mentions different types of officers. I don't know. I mean, I've never been in the military. I haven't studied that structure in any detail, so I didn't know how to interpret it all exactly. Like, I'm not even sure, like, battalions, divisions, companies, like, I have some kind of vague idea how it all works, but he just did whatever the German army did, right? Like, he was essentially an employee of the Wehrmacht. So however they had their command structure set up would have been how he did it. Right.
I guess that's probably how most militaries operate. They don't.
It's totally standardized. Yeah, I mean, he's just a cog in the very complicated machine. At the end of the day,
you didn't read Alfred Sloan's book on running General Motors as new management technique.
He didn't make up his own organizational structure. He may have had some input on it in the late 1920s, but I think that the Prussians had figured out how to run a military by the 1850s or if not earlier, and they just used that system.
Why don't you talk about the Prussians? Let me just ask that quick question and then go ahead, Mr. Anderson. But you mentioned the Prussians. They're very famous, I guess, for being these strongly disciplined soldiers. I thought that might be worth discussing if you have anything to add. But what do you want to ask, Mr. Anderson? Sorry for cutting you off.
Oh, no, that's a fine direction to go. I'll defer to you in game.
Oh, sure. Okay. So, Ajax, did he talk, or did you gather, rather, from his just background or discussions of what it really means to be a quote-unquote Prussian soldier as opposed to even like a German soldier, if that's different?
Right. So Germany's pretty well a very regional country, and it was even more regional when they had more regions before the Oder-Nessa line. But the current border with Poland. But he mentions many times in the book being a Prussian. Like he saw himself, he's a German, but he's a Prussian, probably a Prussian, just as much as he is a German. And
he was born with a Polish last name, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, von Lewinsky. Yeah. The same, right. Actually, that's how you would say Monica Lewinsky, the famous
Yeah,
Clinton lady.
I wondered about that, but go ahead.
Yeah,
No
no, I mean
relation.
Prussia was a sort of Baltic slash Slavic state that was conquered in the Middle Ages by Germans, by the Teutonic Knights. And
Yeah.
they didn't, I mean, the legend is that they expelled the Slavs. But as usually is the case when you take over a country, you know, the Anglo-Saxons or the Turks, whoever you're talking about, all you really do is replace the elite. So the Prussians are sort of unique in that they're sort of Germanized Slavs with a lot of with a good amount of German ancestry. And they spoke Plattdeutsch. They spoke a North German dialect that was pretty distinct from the South. But they're sort of molded into this military people by the precarious position that they were put in. So, like Frederick the Great is, you know, their great leader who expanded the state and was regarded as probably, you know, the greatest German-speaking military leader of all time. But yeah, so I think of the Prussians as they're the military minds of Germany. They're what gave like the German Empire its military focus, whereas you know the Bavarians are the Germans from like the Rhineland or the Stuttgart part of Germany, the south west part of Germany. They're the industrialists. They're the ones who make the weapons, and the Prussians are the ones who use the weapons. That's how I sort of think of them.
So is my read on what you just said correct? Is that they were conquered, but then they were sort of very quickly conscripted as a means to sort of gain their loyalty by giving them sort of a status in the empire.
It would be more accurate to say that they conquered the rest of Germany. Like Germany is kind of created it had existed as like a geography, and they had some kind of precursors. But the modern German state, Prussia, basically beats France in 1871, and they take the Prussian king and make him the German emperor. So a lot of the Prussian institutions actually like just become German institutions.
Interesting. And why were they so good at being military people? What was it about them?
I think of them as sort of like the best of the Slavs and the best of the Germans, at least in terms of organization and in that regard. But
they had kind of a very robust military tradition going back to Frederick the Great in like 1720 or something. I mean, they're like a relatively small area at the time, and kind of like, you know, in a bad neighborhood without a lot of defensible terrain. So the rule of thumb there is that like either you get huge or you get dense. Either you like conquer vast amounts of territory, or you have like a very well developed military arm to defend your territory with. I guess they kind of did the one, and then they ended up doing the other on like a 200-year time scale.
Makes me kind of curious because at least the western part of Poland that Hitler was making claims to during the early part of his role as Chancellor of Germany before the war, that he called basically what he was saying was that part of Poland was German. And so I'm assuming that the Prussian mentality still existed in Poland. And so my question is, why did the Polish army crumble so quickly like it did? Did they just simply not have the equipment that you mentioned that the Rhinelanders were churning out for the Germans? Or what was it that made the Polish army fall within the matter of, 2 weeks or something, that the Germans took over Poland and the Western Poland, and then the Russians took the rest, I guess? The Prussians are supposed to be kind of in that region, if I'm not mistaken. So what happened there?